consensus is a fairly common term in community. It is the most common form. It exists in a number of varieties, but in some sense or another, it is the most common form of decision-making used in intentional community. However, having said that, it doesn't mean people know what they're doing. Consensus actually, out of the context of the background of mainstream society, is a pretty radical act and is a pretty different, it requires a different kind of mindset and orientation to get good results. So a lot of groups naively adopt it because it's common or they're advised that it's a good direction to go. They read maybe a little bit about it and think they understand it, and often get in over their heads because they haven't stopped to really digest the depth of what it will take for consensus to work. And so I want to alert you to that right at the outset before we get into the ins and outs or mechanics of some things. Consensus requires an adjustment from an upbringing. I mean, there's exceptions, I'll allow that. It depends on how you were raised, but I was, and most people, I mean, 98% or more of the people in the United States, at least, were raised in a competitive culture, adversarial, hierarchic, capitalistic culture, and where you learn to, how do I fight to win? I don't mean that in a manipulative or mean-spirited way, although those things exist. I just mean it's a combative thing, and a struggle will produce the best outcome kind of thing. And for consensus to thrive and to get its potential, you need to understand that you need a different mindset. You need to not bring your competitive self to that engagement. That you're trying to build cooperative culture in contrast to competitive culture, which means, how do I figure it out with other people rather than how do I prevail over other people? And so this is a different way of, it requires unlearning competitive conditioning. And that's not a simple thing. It's because we've been swimming in that water most of our lives, or maybe all of our lives in some cases. And so to actually make this shift requires making visible those things which you do kind of automatically now, because it's the way we've been raised. And it's been reinforced in all the major, institutions in the mainstream culture, whether that's family or church or school or work. All those things tend to have a hierarchic and competitive or adversarial milieu in which you operate. You have to learn how to function in that world. And so whatever you learn there often becomes, even though that maybe allows you success in the mainstream context, when you're trying to do cooperative culture in an intentional community, you're doing a different animal. You're doing a different thing. And those behaviors that were rewarding are now going to get you into trouble. And so you need to understand that, how we can be graceful about people where they are in their journey to becoming more aware and more cooperative, but also sending a clear note of what are we trying to encourage, what behaviors do we want with each other, and being aware of that and how to move toward that is going to be enormously beneficial in terms of whether or not you have success in using consensus. And so that it's a perfectly fine outcome, that your idea doesn't really prevail or even relate necessarily to what the final outcome is. You contributed and did your work and you paid attention, and you weren't resistant to some other idea coming forward if that seemed better. I mean, if there was a surge of interest in that, the group decided it. That's not your failure, it's a success of the group. And it's your resistance to hearing different ideas than yours that gets in the way. That's a common element in mainstream culture, and it needs to be as extinguished as possible in community for consensus to thrive. And that's not a simple bar, because unfortunately, most people join community without understanding that for this to work well, we need a commitment to unlearn competitive conditioning. And so a lot of times that's not revealed until you've already bought the house. And it's like you're already there now, and you often have people who bring those same strategies and behaviors that they've learned to be successful with in the mainstream into the community. And now you just have more occasions to fight. And it's like it's a slog instead of light and creative. So understanding that mindset and the need for that kind of shift is foundational both for the community to do well and for consensus to be a good choice in how you make decisions.